Hey everybody, I'm Sean Mullen from RampantDesignTools.com, and today I'm going to show you the techniques that I use to remove the wires and rigs in the high fall action scene that you see right here. This was a ton of fun, and I'd like to thank Ryan for the opportunity. I haven't had this much fun doing wire work since I worked on shows like Charmed and Hercules and movies like Dude, Where's My Car, Lake Placid. Lots of wire work in those, and well, to be honest, I haven't been creatively challenged in wire work like this in a long time, and I really enjoyed it. And working with Ryan was a great insight to see how he visualizes pieces and how he works. So it was really great experience. Can't thank him enough. And all right, so let's jump on in, and I'm going to show you what I'm going to do. Basically, everything's done in After Effects and Photoshop. You don't really need to have crazy mad skills in either to do this stuff. It's all very basic techniques that used over and over again will be able to accomplish what we're doing here. So first things first, let's take a look at the shot that we're going to do here. This is the Luther Fall shot where dude says, "I don't think so," gets shot and takes a dive. This is the very first shot that was handed to me in the sequence, and it's probably the easiest one to explain how I achieved the wire work. So I'm going to go through this in detail, and then I'm going to give you a quick overview of some of the other shots that I worked on. All right, so obviously the job here is to get rid of this wire right here. Zoom in like so. And the crazy thing about wires is they're not visible in every frame. They're not solid in every frame, so solid and not so solid. Due to shutter angle, motion blur, things like that, due to the wire itself wiggling around. So there's unique situations for every single scene. Sometimes the wires create shadow, sometimes there's additional harnesses that you don't see. Everything has to be removed, and ideally you have to make your director happy. So how do we do this? Well, method number one that I use almost all the time is I create a clean plate and I track it in, otherwise known as tracking a patch. So let's go ahead and play this scene real quick and let's start looking for areas of opportunity for a clean plate. You can always paint one, but if the scene itself has a natural clean plate that you can pull from, it's going to make your life a lot easier because you're not recreating anything. The scene has actually done that part of the job for you. All right, so let's go ahead and... This looks pretty good. This area right here is what I'm looking at. And right here is where the wire was for the first 20 or so frames, see? So let's go back to that frame, and I'm going to pull from it right here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab our layer and duplicate it and make it a still. Go to Layer, Time, Freeze Frame. And let's pretend I'm organized and label this. Call this still. I'm terrible. I have Untitled 1 through 900. You know, I have to get better at that, but I'm normally working at a feverish pace and for myself. So, all right, so as you can see right here, we have ourselves a clean plate. There's no wire here, and we're going to use this to get rid of the wire for the first half of this shot. Let's turn off the still here and go back to our original plate. So how am I going to do this? Well, there's a pretty decent camera move on this, so I obviously am not going to hand track it, and I'm not going to use the After Effects tracker. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and track this in Mocha, which comes free with After Effects. So we're going to Animation, Track in Mocha AE, and go down here. And go ahead and hit OK. This is, hey, we've already done this before. Yep, so go ahead and click OK. All right, so I pulled my clean plate from around, like I think frame 24. Yeah. So I'm just going to use that as a frame of reference. I'm going to grab the pen tool here, and I'm just going to find an object that I can use to track the camera work. All right, and I'm going to track backwards from here. And then I'll go back and track forwards. Now this scene was delivered to me as two scenes in one, so at some point you're going to see another shot just pop up. We'll just ignore that. I could have trimmed the comp, but again, I'm lazy. So okay, there's that second part of the scene that I was talking about. So we're good. The track looks decent. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Export Tracking Data. Make sure it says After Effects Transform Data, and hit Copy to Clipboard. Going back to After Effects, what I want to make sure when I paste the data is that I'm at the very first frame. A lot of times people will paste it randomly and then write me on other tracking tutorials that I've done. They said, hey, it doesn't work. You always have to make sure that you're at your very first frame. Go ahead and do Layer New Null. This is going to be our tracking null, and I'll hit Paste. And again, I'll label this and pretend that I actually am organized. Call this Track. Make sure to save often. I'm going to put this up here just for organizational purposes. Now, okay, I'm going to go over to the frame that I was actually using as my clean plate. I'm going to highlight the still, and I'm going to parent it to the track. Boom. So if we watch just the still now, if I roll back, you're going to see a moving still frame based on the camera work that's in the shot. All right, cool. So that part's done. Let's go back to here. And of course, on the still frame, we're not wiping out the entire shot. That would be mean and wrong. There's amazing lighting and camera work here, and I don't want to flatten Ryan's work. That would be a big no-no. So we only want to replace what we have to. So for now, I'm just going to drop the opacity here so we can see the difference. So right here, you can see where the wire is. So it looks like at the beginning of the shot, the wire is about this far over. Yeah. So it looks like the wire goes basically from here over. So that's where we want to roto. So we'll just double click on that layer, grab our pen tool, and just make a decent mat right here. Like so. Now remember, the more you take out, the more you have to put back in. This technique involves roto, which is real simple, but obviously whatever you're removing, which would be in this this shape right here, you're going to have to roto back in. So be cognizant of that. If you make a giant mat, you're going to have to do a lot of roto or garbage matting to replace it. I'm doing this nice and big to try to show you what I'm doing. I wouldn't normally do a patch this large, but I'm doing it for the tutorial so we get a better understanding of what I'm doing. All right, so let's go ahead and re-up the opacity so it's gone. And let's go ahead and hit F for feather and feather this bad boy. I usually do nice big feathers like so. And let's roll it back and see. Cool. Now, this is not going to last for the entire shot. First and foremost, the wire doesn't stay here through the entire shot, so it would be idiotic to keep it there. And secondly, there's dramatic lighting changes because of the way his body is interacting with the lights. So as you can see, like right here, obviously that's a problem. Now, if you felt like, no, I need to have this arrow the whole time, well, then it's your job to start matching the color of every single frame, and that's a whole different tutorial. But there's really no reason to replace that. So we're just going to do it for the frames that it's covered. So it looks like this is where the wire is at frame 22. So it looks like this patch is going to cover us for the first 20 frames. So that gets us halfway home. Not a bad technique, covering half the shot with one maneuver. Not bad at all. Okay, so where do we go from here? Like I said, you have to roto. The great thing about wire and rig removal is the majority of the techniques you're going to use are very simple. So even if it takes you a long time to roto or to paint or to track, you don't need years and years of mastery to be able to resolve these situations. So let's go ahead and duplicate the Luther layer one more time, pull it up over the still, and I'm going to call this roto. Again, really pretending that I'm labeled and organized. You do not want to see my real comps, or maybe you do. Okay, double click on the roto layer, and of course you've got the wire here, our best friend. So what I get to do is I get to get up close and personal with my friend Luther here and start making a mat. It's really not that big a deal. A lot of times you just put on Spotify or Pandora. I like to rock it out to some Cirque du Soleil or something that's not super distracting, but just keeping your shape simplistic and rotoing out what you need to roto out. So for this situation, I will do the head. Sometimes I'll do the ears separately depending upon the action, but I'll do the head and then the neck and then the torso. I try to keep my shapes simplistic so they're easy to manipulate. You can also roto in Mocha, and sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. In this particular job, I just kind of zoned out and started rotoing. Bad habits, old habits. There's nothing wrong with the mask tool in After Effects at all. So it's really up to what you feel better at using, what you're more comfortable using. I love the roto tools in Mocha, but I really was able to rip through this roto really quickly in After Effects, so I just didn't. I just kept my tracking in Mocha and did my roto in After Effects. But it's all personal preference. There is no wrong way to roto. Roto time! As you can see so far, we're getting pretty good. The wire's gone up to frame 21. You can see it right here again. So for the first 20 frames, we are good to go. Obviously, I need to roto his neck and some of his torso back in. But you can see no wire, a key. So then the next thing I need to do is I need to kill this patch, because obviously from this frame on it's unnecessary. So I think from here I'll just do a quick fade down, quick opacity shift, 1, 2, 3, and lower that down. roll it back. There you go. So now I'll finish the roto on Luther for this part of the scene. As you can see, the very first 20 frames, the wire is gone. We're good to go. Roll it back. Looks pretty good so far. All right, so the first 20 frames are clean. We're good, no wires. Starting on frame 21, we've got this right here. So what do? Well, here's where another technique comes in. It's when you start to paint. Now, if you're not a great painter, it's okay. It just takes time. After Effects is a pretty decent paint set, and so does Photoshop. So I'm going to compare and contrast the two here real quick. So I typically paint on a second layer. You don't have to. You can paint on the original layer, but I just like to, this is the one time I am organized. I like to keep all of my different methods on different layers. That way I can isolate anything if there's, or change things in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Command D, duplicating the bottom layer, and change this to the word paint. And of course hit save. So now, when you're painting, and especially in After Effects, you want to make sure that there's no trace of your painting. If any of you have used the clone tool, you can tell very quickly if you've been cloning. Sometimes it leaves a mark. You want to make sure that you don't. If you just notice when I just did that really quick clone tool, there is a significant delay. And I don't have the world's fastest machine, but it's a pretty decent box. It's a 6-core, 32 gigs of RAM. Huge cache drive. I have a 980 gig solid state cache drive. You know, a pretty decent video card. It's not the best machine in the world, but there's a delay just because that's just, I believe it's just the way the After Effects paint tools are. And they're fine for what they are. If you like painting in After Effects and you don't like jumping into another app, that's great. Notice what I just did there. I added an artifact. If I undo, you can see it's not quite the same when you're cloning. It leaves a little trace. You want to be careful of that. You do that too much and the wire will be gone, but you'll notice weird artifacts in the background, and that's basically drawing your attention away from the scene and towards whatever you've done. So you want to be really careful when you're cloning to not do that. I personally hate painting in After Effects, and I love After Effects. But I'm showing you this just because a lot of people will be like, well, why do I have to leave the app? You don't. You use whatever you want. When you're going to paint in After Effects, make sure to come over here, though, and make sure to change duration to single frame. If you're cloning and you hit play, that clone is going to happen across your entire scene. So I want to make sure that your painting's set to single frame. This is uncomfortable to me because I hate painting in After Effects. Just because when I started my career, it was all about Photoshop or Commotion or some other kind of paint tool, the Henry. So, yeah, I mean, this is fine. But see, now when you've cloned over here, I've zoomed in even closer, I've created a bigger problem than I had initially by cloning. You have to be really, really careful, right? So this takes a little bit of time. So maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe you can see that solid edge. So it's like, how do I clean that up? Do I come over here and I clean that up, and then do I keep painting? What do I do when I decide to paint is my next technique that I want to do? If I believe that's the right solution, what do I do? See, look, if I page up, clean, page down, yikes, page down. You might not notice it. You might be able to get away with it. I don't like saying phrases like get away with it. That bothers me. I like the director to be happy. When I turn in my work, especially on this sequence, I want Ryan to be happy and go, well, wait a second, because I know he's the kind of director who's going to go frame by frame. So, that plus I'm not trying to snake something by. I'm an artist, so I want to be proud of what I'm doing, and we all should be. So I really can't stand the painting in After Effects, but again, that is just personal preference. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm just going to delete this layer altogether. I can't stand it. Makes me want to cry. All right, so what do we do then? If we decide that this is paint, I'm not going to track a patch for this just because I want to show you another technique. I may or may not have tracked a patch for this in the original shot, but I want to show you what Photoshop can do for you. And if you have a recent version of Photoshop, there's a really cool addition to your paint tool. So let's go ahead and just jump into Photoshop real quick. I'm going to go ahead and bring in the original file. A lot of people don't know that Photoshop has some really great video tools in it, right? So Even let's say you didn't want to track a patch. I'll just show you something real quick on this frame. Let's say you're like, well, I just want to see what happens when I paint. You have much better clone tools here with real-time response, no delay. No matter what I do, blah, 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 blah. See? So I can be a lot more accurate because I'm not waiting for that. And the delay in After Effects is small. It's not negligible, but it's small. It's just enough to drive me crazy. This, for me, love this, right? So you could absolutely use paint instead of doing the tracking patch that I showed you. I'm just trying to show you every technique that I use to do all kinds of wire and rig removals. So, and then of course you want to zoom in and change your brush sizes. So you can absolutely do it that way, right? No problem. So let's find that frame that I was on. Here it is. So you've got this really spread out wire here. Like, what do you do? Well, sometimes Photoshop can do a better job painting than you can. And what I mean by that is I don't remember how far back this goes, but content aware can be your friend in a lot of these instances. So let's just try that. Let's go ahead and just say, look, Photoshop, this is a problem. Go ahead and hit Shift F5. And based on what you did last, it might say foreground color, background color. Make sure you set it to content aware. Command D. Wow. It did a better job than I probably could have sitting there with the clone tool, right? And the great thing is these have, Photoshop has great tools for video, so you just use left and right to go frame by frame. That's pretty darn good. But let's see what happens when you start interacting with the rope. What do we do there? Same thing. I'm going to go ahead and ask Photoshop and see if it can do it. Otherwise, I can bust out the tool myself. Oh, see? That's a problem. Photoshop doesn't know what's right and what's wrong. It's just doing what it's programmed to do. So you could keep this top part here, maybe, or you could paint it. So I'm going to go ahead and undo because that's way worse than, than I could do. So with that selection still held, I'm going to go ahead and grab my trusty dusty clone tool and we'll see what I can do here. And I highly recommend using a stylus. You can absolutely paint with a mouse, whatever's more natural for you, but I find that paint in Roto is a lot easier with a stylus. And you can get a Wacom or a Wacom tablet. I don't know how it's pronounced. GIF, whatever. You can get a Wacom tablet pretty darn cheap nowadays. The Intuos models, I think, are under. You can get a small one, I think, for around $100. So it won't break the bank, and it will absolutely save your sanity. So that's pretty cool. All right, so let's just go ahead and find this wire. The fun part about wire removal is sometimes you'll lose it. You're like, oh, where'd it go? And it'll take a few minutes for you to see the remnants of it, the shadows, the lights, whatever. But right here, blammo, this is definitely one that's calling for our attention. And this is one of those scenarios where I doubt Photoshop will be able to help me, but I'll try. We've got going over his arm, we've got it going over this super hot white spot over the background and sort of interacting with the rope. So let's go ahead and once again, let's just start trying our various techniques. I use cloning all the time to try to just get rid of it like so. And as you can see, I'm going to zoom in real quick. This is what I was talking about cloning. You can see remnants of where I was. You can see where I used to be. So you have to either clean that up or find a different technique that works for you. But always make sure that you're taking care of your messes, cleaning up your messes, and not drawing your attention to what isn't supposed to be there. Also, remember, you're generating this paint, right? So you can pick and choose what part of the paint you want to use just using the Roto that we did before. And again, I wouldn't necessarily track a patch on his shirt and just go ahead and paint that. So just go through and... So the cool thing about using Photoshop, as you can see, is sometimes you can rely on Photoshop to do the job for you, and sometimes you have to do it yourself. But the clone tool, I believe, is way more superior in Photoshop, as it should be, as it's a paint program, than in After Effects. If you want to use the After Effects tools, you're more than welcome. There's nothing wrong with it. It's whatever you want to use. Heck, you could probably use Microsoft Paint if you really wanted to. I'm not going to, but I'm sure somebody has done it. All right, so the idea is to go through every frame and find all the wires that you possibly can and paint them out. So when you're done painting in Photoshop, when you finished your paint work, just go ahead and go to File, Export, render to video. And it's going to ask you where do you want it to go, what do you want the frame size to be, the compression, etc., etc., etc. So go ahead and what frames you want. You can render out just specific frames. I'm going to go ahead and render everything. And we can go back to After Effects. And then I'll just import it, and I'll just bring it in my timeline. So now because it's on top, I'm just going to label it paint. If we play it back, it's going to have all the parts that we've already removed because I'm not selecting what I want to use. So here's where you just go through and you just find the frames that you want to use. So we painted everything up to frame 21. So let's go ahead and just kill that layer up until frame 21. It's already starting to look better. All right, so after a little while of painting and cloning and tracking, you've got something like this. So that's about it. It's just lots of painting, cloning, tracking, blending, and you might do a bunch of work for just one single frame and then move on to a whole different technique for the next frame. So that's the basics of wire and rig removal. It's basically paint, cloning, roto, and tracking. There's other techniques that you can use to help aid those techniques, but that's the core of all wire and rig removal, is finding a way to either get a clean plate, make a clean plate, track it in, or bust out the clone tool. Maybe Photoshop can help you. Content Aware is a wonderful tool if you're doing really detailed paint work and maybe you can't get the clone to look right. As I've shown you, Content Aware both can help you and hurt you, so you just have to keep trying, keep at it. This is a time-consuming process. This particular shot took me maybe an hour to build initially when Ryan gave it to me, but there were some shots in this sequence that took 20 and 40 hours just because of how much work is involved. And that's what I'd like to show you next, is the other shots are a lot more complicated. So let's go ahead and I'll just do a quick overview of the other shots that were in this sequence. All right, so this shot is right after where he gets thrown over. This is the following shot. So I basically had to recreate the background. I had to recreate the lighting. I had to keep the shadows in place that were supposed to be there, get rid of the shadows that weren't. That's just part of the job. So if we look at the original shot, from about this frame, you can see this is a wire right here. And it goes over his face, goes over his torso, and it still keeps going right here. And here's where it starts to fan out. So it's crossing all these elements right here. Boom, boom, boom. Right here. Again, right here. And wires change color based on how they react to light. There you go, see some motion blur on the wire. So it's solid and then blurry. So basically everything in this quadrant of the shot had to be replaced somehow, right? And you just mix and match until you figure out what works best for the shot. So what I did, I'll just start peeling back layers. See, as you can see, I'm really terrible about labeling. When I work with a team, everything's labeled because I don't want to be that guy. But when I'm working for myself and I'm just in the zone, this is what you get. 7, 6, 5, 4, all labeled the same thing. It's just how it is. This is one particular track patch that I did, mixed with another track patch. All with the same techniques, jumping into Mocha, jumping out of Mocha, doing Roto. So I'll turn these two layers off and you can see the Roto of Luther. Wah! And you mix and match everything and you've got yourself the recreation of the shot. Now it's important that when you're doing paint work that you keep everything as original as possible. So all these shadows and lights over here, this is from the original work. This is from the original shot. You don't want to mess with anything. You want to keep things as legitimate as possible. You want to keep everything in there that you can. So when you're painting stuff out, you got to maintain the shadows, right? But you want to make sure that the shadow doesn't include the rig, and it happens all the time. So when someone says, hey, remove this wire, they're not thinking necessarily about all the side jobs that you have to do to get rid of it. And I'll show you that in a second. There's so many crazy, awesome lights, and this is such a detailed environment that you have to be very, very careful to preserve that. And it ends up being quite a bit of work. So that was that second shot. Those two were probably the easiest of the bunch. It got infinitely more complex as the scene goes on, and that was what was a lot of fun, to figure out a solution. The wire and rig removal is just creative problem solving. You have the tools. You know how to roto, you know how to paint, you know how to clone, you know how to track. How do I use those techniques and those tools to solve these problems? That's what wire and rig removal is all about. All right, so this shot was the most challenging and probably the most fun of the bunch. This is really like 3 shots in one. You've got the guy falling, you've got this section right here, and then it's coming back up, right? This is all obviously in one shot, but I broke this down into 3 parts because it's just, there's no tracking data that's going to go across the entire sequence. There's no paint data. I mean, this is just, in order for my own sanity, I had to go, okay, I need to attack this part, then I need to figure out how I'm going to solve this part, and then I'm going to solve this part. So right now it looks like just a dude taking a giant tumble while another guy's hanging. Obviously, none of that is reality. He did fall, he is hanging, but there's a use of wire and rigs. So let's look at the original file real quick. So as I scrub through this thing, let's see. So it may be a little bit difficult. The great thing about this environment is it's so detailed that it really helped tell this crazy story. There's this weird deal going down. It's been intercepted in this really awesome location. The bad part of this environment is all these lines and this detail have to be preserved. I can't screw up these cables. All of a sudden this cable can't be over here or whatever, right? So first things first, this dude's on a massive rig. He's got this T-bar thing going. He's got cables going up and down his legs, and it's crossing this entire background, right? And here it goes. I'm just going to zoom out real quick. You really get to see this thing when it sits here and dangles, right? So I have to, my first job is to remove all of this across all these different shapes and textures, and see, it goes, I mean, this T-bar goes over everything. It goes over our secondary actor, or excuse me, our main actor. It goes over the dude who's falling. I mean, it's a lot, right? And it's crossing the entire scene. It's not like they cut it and it goes away. It stays there the entire time. And check it out over here. This is exactly what I was talking about. Shadows. This is what I'm talking about. So when people are looking at the rig and they don't see it, you're going to start noticing, oh crap, it's in other places in the environment. And that's my job, or our job, to get rid of it. Now, mind you, he's fallen, but the rig is still alive. There's no real way to kill that rig. So as the camera comes back up, see, here's the rig dancing again. As the camera comes back up, it's completely crossing our actor. See, you can see it going over his pants, it's going over his shirt. At one point it goes over his arms and even his face, see? So after you sit in the corner and you cry a little bit going, you know, there's no way I can automate this, how do I do this? You have to start looking back at the techniques. I need to do paint, I need to do roto, and I need to preserve. And again, talking about preservation, we have to keep this shadow. This shadow is crucial to locking him into the environment. But what's wrong with this shadow? Boom, there's the rig. I can't remove the rig here and then keep it here. That's a dead giveaway, right? So what do? We do the same exact techniques that I showed you with Luther, just in way more detail. I mean, if I just pull up this comp here, there is all these layers that I used to create this. And on top of it, there's nested comps. I mean, there's just so much work here to get it done. But when it was done, Ryan, the director I was working for, was happy. And that's all that matters to me, is these invisible effects. They're kind of thankless. You can't point that out to your friend at the shot and go, hey, check out the work you can't see, you know. But you make your director happy, and that's all that matters. So I can quickly turn some layers on real quick. I don't want to make this go too long. I've heard my tutorials can go a little too long, so I don't want to bore you to death, but I do want to show you the kind of work that's involved in doing something like this, because this was about 20, 30 hours worth of work and sweat. So again, like I told you, I separated this into multiple passes. So a lot of this is paint work. So as you can see, bing, 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 I have to get rid of this rig, these wires, this wire, and any shadows or any other kind of artifacts that are occurring as a result. And so I had to track this top. I had to make a matte painting that tracks this, that replaces this. Then I have to roto. So let's see if I can show you some of the steps here. So this is just one of many patches that I tracked to get rid of the wire. And here's the roto of our bad guy falling. Ah. You can slowly see how I started to put this shot together. and how I broke it up into pieces and parts. So here's the work on the first section where he falls, and then it jumps back into the section with the rig, and then I continue my work forward. And so it's exactly what I showed you, just in greater detail. Lots of tracking, lots of patching, lots of roto, lots of paint. Even you might work 3 hours on 4 frames. And you know, a lot of people are like, well, I don't know what you've done, but I like it. You know, and that's all that matters. Is the end result is all that matters. And not only do I have to roto our bad guy who's falling, I have to roto our hero here, our main character. And as you can see, there's no wires or rigs on him, right? So how did I do that? Well, there's one other technique that I use, and it's not necessarily for everybody, but when I started in Hollywood, one of my biggest jobs was morphing. I did all kinds of creature morphs and demon morphs, and you know, I morphed Ally McBeal into Laura Croft, and you know, every demon on Charmed had to morph, and you know, so that was the morphing was huge back then, and we had really great morphing tools. Nowadays, the morphing tools kind of suck. They're not nearly as good as Elastic Reality. I don't care what anybody says. So, but I found some morphing tools that work, and that's exactly what I did. So I'll just go in here real quick to our morph. I mean, so right now we are comps within comps within comps. I isolate all my issues that I need to work on one at a time. So dude here has his own series of nested comps. And the idea, obviously, is to get rid of the wire that's crossing his jacket, his shirt, his arms, his hands, his face, his legs, but still maintain his shadow, right? So I can't kill this shadow because then he'll look like he's composited, and that's a no-no. So I did a bunch of morph work. So these are a set of still frames from the actual shot, that morph, and I only use the jacket. Here, I'll isolate it so you can actually see. And that's literally me morphing around wires. I know it doesn't look like much, but that right there killed the wire going over the jacket. So I went from one clean frame of the jacket to another, and I morphed around it and then rotoed it in. And of course, when you're going to do that, you're going to have to do it a lot. All right, so this was one of the hardest shots in the sequence because we're so close. You know, the details that need to be preserved are his hands, his arms, his torso, his face. And there is a section right here where the wire goes right over his face and his jacket and his arm. Now, you know, we could probably have just gotten rid of the wire and maybe nobody would have noticed this weird line going over his face. But that's not acceptable. That, you know, the idea is to try to solve the problem. So what do? Well, this is what I was talking about before. This is where I relied on my morphing. So I did this. I'll just turn the masks off here, and so you can see the morph that I did. There we go. So again, I morphed up and around the shot to get rid of the wire, as you can see. So then all I did was I just rotoed that in on top of Jones. So if I just take the roto and put it on top of the raw here, clicking off the layer so it's not so distracting. You can see where the wire is on his jacket there. That's a whole different set of layers, but it's not going across his face anymore. And it's not as simple as like, hey, I'm just going to roto this and morph it. It took some time. It took some ingenuity. Had to paint some frames, had to test, had to adjust. But this is the solution that we came around because I didn't want to give Ryan a shot with a wire going across the dude's face. That's not fair. Jones deserves a better result than that. So, Mr. I'm climbing up this rig doesn't have a wire across his face. So again, that's pretty much it. I'd like to thank Ryan for this opportunity. He's one of my favorite directors, and it's always great to get an insight on how directors look and at material and how they treat their edits. I'd like to see everyone's creative process. I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, everybody, so much for watching this. It might have been a little long. I apologize, but the thing is that while wires and rigs are basic, you can go into just insane detail on what's involved. Yeah, I'm Sean Mullen from RampantDesignTools.com. Thanks for watching.